Hello, Neanderthal friends. Welcome to a quiet corner of time, where ice stretches endlessly, and footprints pressed into snow whisper longer than any written word. Whether lying in bed, letting thoughts drift into darkness, or wearing headphones in a silent room, this story will find its way to you. It is an invitation to slow down, to step into the world of a human branch that once walked the earth for hundreds of thousands of years, leaving traces of survival that cannot be erased. This is not a short story. This is a long journey, deliberate, grounded, and gently paced. It does not rely on exaggeration, legend, or fantasy. There is only ice, snow, fire within a cave, and the actions that preserve life through harsh winters. If the listener's eyes close midway, it does not matter. The story remains here, like footprints pressed deep into snow, like ashes lingering from nights of fire, like a heartbeat echoing in the frozen world. Tonight, the journey begins in the Ice Age. Imagine Europe cloaked in thick sheets of ice, endless frozen plains stretching beyond the horizon. Across the snow-white landscape, herds of mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, and giant bison move deliberately, leaving deep impressions in the ice. Sunlight glints across the frozen terrain like scattered gems. Amid the biting northern wind, Neanderthals endure. Their bodies are robust, chests broad, muscles coiled and strong. Hands skillfully grasping spears and flint knives, feet planted firmly in deep snow. Eyes always observing the terrain, every feature of their form tuned to survival. Encoded in each cell, this story does not speak of glory or conquest. It speaks only of one thing: survival. How Neanderthals tended fire within icy caves, how they hunted massive herds, sharing pieces of meat and chunks of fat, preserving fire and tools to conserve energy for the group. How they chose shelters, moved with the seasons, protected their young, and maintained rhythms of life through blizzards and frost. Every act was directed toward one goal: sustaining themselves, sustaining the group, leaving their footprints engraved upon the earth of the Ice Age. Step into that world, where fire dances upon cave walls, where stone strikes stone echo across frozen landscapes, where breaths vanish into cold air and blend with the sound of wind. This is the story of Neanderthal survival, how a branch of humans stood resilient against a merciless nature, leaving a deep imprint on the map of life from this point. The story unfolds not through books or the voices of later generations, but through the daily rhythms and actions of a human branch that once existed on Earth. It speaks not of victories or defeats, not of glory or shame, and seeks no legend. All is reduced to a singular reality: survival. Survival is not an abstract concept. It is measured in moments governed by fire, tools, hands, and steadfast feet. Within the cave, the flickering fire casts shadows along the stone walls, producing shapes that are not for admiration but for survival, lighting the work of scraping hides, cutting flesh, arranging tools, observing signs of day's end, or sensing a prolonged winter. Each action, however small, carries weight, adding wood to sustain the flame, placing stones to shield the wind, inspecting a spear before stepping outside, tracking faint trails in the snow to gauge direction and danger. All form a chain of survival decisions, repeated over thousands of winters, over hundreds of millennia. There is no narrator, no explanation. The story exists in the breath of long nights, in footprints pressed into hardened earth, in the echo of stone striking stone throughout the cave. in eyes ever watching the surrounding landscape. It is the rhythm of an unbroken life, a rhythm in which even the smallest actions maintain the continuation of life. Follow those footprints, where survival is not a matter of luck or power, but the product of instinctive intelligence, physical strength, and tireless persistence. This is the story of how a branch of humans existed, adapted, and skillfully preserved life day by day, hour by hour. Step slowly to that rhythm, and the Neanderthals come into focus, not as myth, not as imagination, but as the steady, persistent cadence of their quiet lives. Ice Age Europe was a harsh land, where nature presented continuous challenges to any surviving creature. Massive sheets of ice, as solid as rock, spread from the north, covering Scandinavia, stretching across Germany, reaching down to Poland, forming colossal glaciers, silent yet dominating the entire landscape. The cold was not fleeting. It permeated everything. Thick snow over the plains, frost forming delicate crystals on plants, northern winds slicing through fur and skin like sharpened blades. Winters lasted months, sometimes years, transforming plains into hard, icy deserts, where animals and plants moved slowly or hibernated with the rhythm of the cold. Weak sunlight filtered through dense grey clouds, reflecting on ice in pale shards. Rare sunny days could not dispel the bone-deep chill. Rivers froze, and the ground cracked with cycles of freeze and brief thaw. The northern wind was an ever-present entity, twisting across frozen plains, slamming into mountain ridges, sweeping through dry forests, carrying snow, shards of ice, and penetrating cold into every crevice and cave. The wind's howl sometimes resembled distant screams, mingling with the faint sound of cracking branches and animals traversing deep snow. The frozen plains were not empty. Beneath snow and ice, the earth retained moisture, yet plants were constrained, growing low, sparse, and stiff. Small shrubs, roots compressed deep in frozen soil, sometimes exposed only at the tips of dry grass, provided the sole source of nourishment for surviving creatures. Woolly mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, and giant bison moved deliberately over ice, leaving deep impressions, living testimony to the severity of winter. Their heavy steps shaped the terrain, compacting snow, shifting ice, creating pathways and signals for smaller creatures. Rivers and lakes frozen solid created silent but perilous landscapes. Thin ice, crevices, and deep fissures could claim any life that moved carelessly. Weather changed quickly. One day with mild sun and calm air, the next a heavy snowfall, northern winds rising again. In this environment, survival was a continuous exercise in observation, reaction, and careful choice. Neanderthals did not merely endure the cold. They merged with the rhythm of ice, wind, snow, and hard earth, interpreting seasonal signals, wind patterns, and the movement of other creatures, all functioning as critical survival data. Their experience and acute perception allowed them to anticipate sudden storms, track herds, and avoid hidden dangers. The Ice Age ecological landscape was a harsh symphony of life. Across snow-covered plains, mammoth herds trudged heavily, crushing snow and sparse vegetation. Their thick fur and fat reserves insulated them against the biting cold. Bison grazed quietly on low shrubs, displacing ice underfoot and leaving signs for predators and Neanderthals observing from a distance. Woolly rhinoceroses probed snow with curved snouts for remnants of vegetation. Each step was both survival and a signal, shaping the movement of other creatures. Tracks were more than impressions. They were natural maps guiding predators, prey, and humans alike. In dry forests and low shrublands, ancient deer, reindeer, and wild boar searched for twigs, roots, and leaves. These were crucial food sources for predators such as Ice Age wolves, snow leopards, and prehistoric lynx. Predators adjusted movement carefully, conserving energy while using darkness and northern winds to approach without detection. Smaller creatures, rodents, migratory birds, lizards, and insects hid in rock crevices, tree bases, and thin snow, surviving on bulbs, seeds, and occasionally carrion, forming essential links in the food chain. Migratory birds, appearing during rare warm seasons, provided protein for larger species, sustaining ecological balance. Plants were sparse, but astonishingly resilient. Short grasses, low shrubs, and roots provided sustenance for many herbivores. Cold-tolerant trees grew scattered across plains, offering shelter for birds and small animals, while simultaneously feeding bison, deer, and woolly rhinoceroses. Roots and tough branches stored water and energy beneath thick ice, demonstrating long-term adaptation. Survival depended on these fragile growths. Every leaf, every bulb, every remnant of vegetation was a vital resource. Interactions between species revolved around survival. Mammoths and bison were potential prey for wolves and snow leopards, yet they also created paths across hard snow, aiding smaller animals in reaching plants or evading danger. Smaller predators adapted to the rhythm of larger creatures' movements. All existed within an intricate network. Each winter, life contracted, yielding to endurance. Each rare warm season, energy accumulated, life spread, flowing through every link of the food chain. Every action, no matter how small, contributed to survival, and every living thing, from plant to predator to human, participated in the unbroken rhythm of life across millennia. Beyond this, Neanderthals developed subtle strategies over generations, precise crafting of tools for hunting and butchering, coordinated drives of large prey, and methods to conserve fire and warmth that ensured group survival. Their observation of animal tracks, ice conditions, and seasonal cycles became a form of accumulated wisdom. This knowledge was encoded not in words, but in movements, gestures, and repeated patterns, an enduring curriculum of survival written upon the frozen landscapes of Ice Age Europe. Thus, the story continues, a layered chronicle of endurance, adaptation, and quiet intelligence. It is a story not of legends, nor of heroes, but of life persisted against relentless winter. Step slowly, observe deeply, and the Neanderthals appear, not in myth, not in imagination, but in the steady, patient pulse of survival etched into Earth's frozen memory. It was a harsh rule, where survival became a constant equation, requiring careful observation, swift reflexes, and deliberate choices with every step in such a landscape. Neanderthals did not merely confront the cold. They lived within the rhythm of ice, wind, snow, and hard ground. All these elements formed a survival environment demanding persistence, acute perception, and daily adaptation. Tiny signs of the season, of the wind, of the movement of animals, all were essential survival data. The ecological panorama of the Ice Age was a world of harsh extremes, yet rich with a rhythm of life. Across snow-covered plains, herds of woolly mammoths moved slowly, each massive step crushing snow and brittle vegetation. Their enormous bodies, Thick fur and insulating fat allowed them to endure bone-chilling temperatures. Nearby, giant bison grazed quietly on low shrubs and dry grass, crushing branches and sliding over ice patches underfoot. Woolly rhinoceroses probed the frozen terrain with curved snouts, seeking remnants of vegetation to survive the long winters. Each movement not only fulfilled a need for nourishment, but left deep impressions in the snow, natural markers for predators and, occasionally, for distant human observers. Within dry forests and low shrublands, ancient deer, reindeer, and wild boar searched for twigs, roots, and leaves left over from the frozen months. They were vital sources of food for predators such as Ice Age wolves, snow leopards, and prehistoric lynxes. Low growls echoed softly, eyes glinting in shadow, monitoring any hint of prey. Predators measured each step carefully, conserving energy while exploiting darkness and northern winds to approach undetected smaller creatures, rodents. Migratory birds, lizards, and insects sought refuge in rock crevices, tree bases, or beneath thin layers of snow. They survived on bulbs, seeds, and the remnants of other animals, forming a small but essential link in the food chain. Migratory birds, appearing during rare warm seasons, supplemented protein for larger species and helped maintain ecological balance. Plant life in this icy world was distributed with harsh precision yet remarkable resilience. Short grasses, low shrubs, roots, and bulbs provided sustenance for many herbivores. Cold-tolerant trees, such as low-growing conifers, appeared scattered across plains, offering shelter for birds and small mammals while feeding bison, deer, and woolly rhinoceroses. Low stature and tough roots conserved water and energy beneath thick ice, and every rigid branch testified to long-term adaptation. Relationships between species were dictated by survival. Mammoths and bison were potential prey for wolves and snow leopards, yet they simultaneously created paths across the hard snow, allowing smaller species access to vegetation or escape from danger. Smaller predators adjusted their rhythm according to the steps of larger animals, and all existed within a tightly connected web. Each winter, life contracted, yielding to endurance. Each rare, warm season, energy accumulated, life flourished, spreading through every link of the food chain. Amid this tableau, Neanderthals stood still, observing. They witnessed the rhythm of mammoth herds, traced the deer footprints in the snow, heard the wind whisper through low shrubs, and interpreted the movements of all creatures. Every animal, plant, and small organism was a living signal, critical data for survival. This was a world where survival was not a matter of luck, but of continuous observation, understanding, and adaptation. Every step, every breath of life in the frozen landscape reminded that survival was a chain of behaviors, rhythms, and decisions, and Neanderthals were one link in that chain between frozen plains and dry forests. Where each north wind cut like a blade, Neanderthals learned to transform nature into both temporary and long-term shelters. They studied mountain crevices, cliffs, and deep, unexplored caves. Each rock, niche, or crack along a hillside was assessed carefully. Wind direction, depth, shade, potential for heat retention, and safety from predators. Not every location was secure. A narrow crevice with thin snow overhead could collapse. A wide cave opening onto the plains could be a direct path to the claws of wolves or snow leopards. Once a suitable rock shelter or wind-protected crevice was found, Neanderthals transformed it into a refuge. Stones and branches were arranged into temporary walls to block prevailing winds and muffle outside noise. Snow and dry leaves were gathered to line the floor, creating insulation, preserving warmth, and preventing direct contact with frozen ground. In larger caves, they chose the deepest corners, where sunlight barely penetrated, maintaining warmth and reducing the risk of sudden predator attacks. Fire was central. A small flame kindled within the rock niche provided not only heat but light, discouraging wild animals from approaching. Large stones placed around the fire blocked wind and retained heat, warming the surrounding ground. Each layer of straw, each stone, was placed deliberately, the result of thousands of observations, experiments, and learned practices. Neanderthals also utilized natural caves, but not all caves were suitable. They chose multi-level caves with entrances facing south or away from the northern wind. Caves had to be tall enough to avoid snowdrifts and deep enough to shield from predator sightlines. Narrow cracks near the cave mouth were filled with leaves and dry branches, forming temporary barriers that reduced noise and hindered access for larger animals. In open plains without natural caves, they sought fallen ancient trees, natural mounds, or dug small pits in hard earth to create temporary shelters. All followed the same principle: avoid wind, cold, and predators. Each shelter was a survival construction, a combination of observation, experimentation, and knowledge accumulated over hundreds of winters. Every step in building and selecting shelters carried a rhythm of survival. Space was shaped by skill, strength, and calculation. Every rock niche, every layer of leaves, every wind-blocking stone testified to the intelligence of survival and the profound understanding of a harsh environment. From these shelters, Neanderthals emerged to face cold and predators, but always had a refuge, a place to hide from snowstorms and claws. Surviving yet another day in the frozen world, within caves, space was organized meticulously. Each area, each object, served survival. Fire remained the center of all activity. Small piles of wood, carefully arranged and tended, provided warmth, light, and a protective presence, both for humans and a subtle deterrent to nearby wildlife. The rhythm of daily life unfolded around these carefully maintained fires, shaping movements, actions, and the unbroken cycle of survival in Ice Age Europe. In the deepest recess of the cave, warmth spread across the stone floor. Large stones arranged around the fire retained heat, making the ground near the flames far more bearable than the surrounding hard, cold rock. The fire did more than provide warmth. It cast a faint light, sufficient to illuminate tools and other essential items, yet not so bright as to spill beyond the cave entrance. Avoiding the attention of curious predators near the fire, tools and supplies were carefully organized. Sharp stone fragments, knives and spears were placed within reach, but arranged deliberately, never in disarray. Every object had its own place, ready for daily necessities. Dry branches, leaves, and straw were gathered into thick layers, forming makeshift bedding that insulated from the cold stone beneath, while muffling footsteps within the cave. Small alcoves were utilized to store food, dried roots, tubers, and pieces of meat or bone, separated by type, so that each could be located instantly when needed. From the cave's mouth, Neanderthals observed the outside world with constant attention. Even under weak sunlight and thick snow cover, subtle signs were not overlooked. Animal footprints pressed into the snow, faint vapors rising from frozen grass, the sharp whistling of wind slicing through low shrubs. Each observation became essential survival data. They interpreted wind directions, identified the main currents of icy air, mapped the paths of large herbivores, and noted even small fluctuations in temperature or sound. Inside the cave, spaces were divided by function. Areas close to the fire were used for crafting tools or preparing food, while deeper, more remote corners served as sleeping quarters, resting areas, and zones to conserve warmth. Narrow, dark recesses became temporary refuges during violent snowstorms or when predators approached the entrance. Every arrangement followed the rhythm of winter: warmth, protection, and observation in the stillness of the cave. The fire's heat mingled with the sense of earth, dry grass, and faint smoke. The crackling of flames and the occasional pop of stones reacting to heat created a unique rhythm within the refuge. Every movement conserved energy. Every object had a purpose. This was not mere rest. It was the center of a survival strategy, where Neanderthals balanced warmth, safety, and vigilance in a hostile environment. Winter was long, and the rhythm of life within the cave never paused. Mornings arrived with weak sunlight filtering through the entrance, and Neanderthals inspected the traces outside: deep mammoth footprints, chewed branches, freshly fallen snow across the plains. Each observation was a calculated survival assessment. They memorized herd movements, recognized approaching predators, and marked potential food sources hidden beneath thick ice. The fire was maintained continuously. Dry wood was added, and the large surrounding stones stored heat both day and night. During snowstorms, the fire became a lifeline. Warmth radiated across the stone floor, and the faint light helped detect any approaching danger from the cave entrance. Each fire reminded them of the rhythm of the season, of subtle shifts in the landscape that could escape casual notice. Food was stored carefully. Meat portions, tubers, roots, and dried fruits were placed away from the fire, in small alcoves, avoiding smoke and direct contact with cold stone. Tools and food were organized by area for quick access. Any lapse could result in the loss of crucial nourishment or draw predators' attention. On heavy snow days, they spent time observing the environment from the cave mouth. The soft rustle of wind, subtle trembling of branches, or new footprints in the snow were noted. Each observation became a living map, guiding decisions about when to venture outside, where to travel, and how to approach necessary tasks beyond the cave. The rhythm of the season dictated all activity. Winter was a period of conserving energy, maintaining fire, keeping warm, and observing. On rare warmer days, softened snow allowed them to check stored food, replenish dry wood and roots, or monitor herd movements in preparation for outdoor tasks. Every action revolved around sustaining life, preserving heat, protecting food stores, and ensuring safety from bloodthirsty predators. Within the cave, everything followed an organized order. Space was allocated by function: sleeping areas, food storage, fire zones, observation points. Each sector supported the seasonal rhythm, helping Neanderthals adapt to the frozen world, survive long, frigid days, and retain the chance to endure future winters. The shelter became the center of survival, where the seasonal pulse, the fire's breath, and the movements of wildlife outside merged, teaching Neanderthals how to remain steadfast amid ice, snow, and claws. Water was both life and challenge. In winter, when streams, lakes, and rivers were frozen, Neanderthals learned to gather water from ice layers, newly fallen snow, or frozen rock crevices. Snow was collected, crushed, and melted atop heated stones near the fire. These small drips became precious drinking water, sufficient to sustain the body through long, cold days. During rare, warm spells, exposed water under the ice was monitored carefully. Flow rate, distance from shelter, and safety from predators determined the timing of water collection. Personal hygiene was minimalist, but effective. Neanderthals used sand, leaves, or snow to clean the body, remove sweat, or wipe mud after foraging. When liquid water was available, hands, feet, and faces were soaked briefly to remove dirt, without prolonged exposure to cold water that could reduce body heat. Alcoves near the fire sometimes served as washing areas, where the heat from stones and fire kept them warm while cleaning. Every act of collecting water or maintaining hygiene balanced safety and weather. Trips to icy streams had to be swift and quiet, eyes alert for predators or environmental changes. Each drop of water obtained, each melted snowflake, became a precious resource, sustaining the body while supporting all other survival activities. Even the seemingly simple daily activities were part of the rhythm of the seasons. In winter, water was scarce, and contact with it was limited. During the brief warmth of the season, streams would reappear, providing enough water not only for drinking but also for extended hygiene. Observing the surroundings, checking animal tracks, and replenishing food or firewood. Every action, from drinking to washing, was inseparably tied to the survival strategy, where cold, claws, and life coexisted in the same space. Within the cave, water was carefully stored. Melted snow or ice was kept in dry rock hollows, placed near the fire but never so close as to evaporate or overheat. Temporary containers made from animal hides or hollowed-out tree bark could also hold water. Every small detail served to maintain a continuous rhythm of life, ensuring that each passing winter allowed Neanderthals to remain steadfast amid the cold. With the warmth of the fire, drinking water from snow, and a clean body prepared to face the harsh environment from within the cave. The fire warmed the body, water dripped from melting snow, and food was preserved in the darkness. But sustaining these conditions required more than physical strength. It required intelligence. In the frozen world, survival depended on the ability to create tools, small objects capable of transforming life. Neanderthals turned to stone, wood, and bone. Stones broken from the base of cliffs were scrutinized for each crack, each rough edge. A strong strike with another pebble could produce a sharp flake. That flake could cut through the thick hide of wild animals, slice meat, remove fat, or scrape hides to prepare garments. Initially, random fragments, over countless generations, became techniques, then knowledge. The way the stone was held, the angle of impact, the precise strike to detach the flake, all were embedded in the hands of Neanderthals. As an unspoken heritage, wood and bone provided shape and structure to tools. A straight, sturdy branch was carefully selected and smoothed. The tip was sharpened with stone and hardened over fire to create rigidity. Combined with a sharp stone edge or a finely shaped bone, the branch became a spear, a weapon capable of piercing thick bison hide or deterring large predators. Resin from trees was melted, sinew dried and twisted into bindings, all forming a durable structure. Every joint revealed intelligence, calculation, experimentation, and knowledge accumulated over time. The sound of striking stone echoed, dry yet rhythmic, mingling with the crackle of burning wood. This became the soundtrack of life. In the cave's shadowed interior, a flake detached from a larger rock, its edge glinting in the red glow of the fire, a flash of light in the darkness. This was not mere labor, but a continuity of memory, a wordless language passed from one individual to the next. In a world where winter stretched endlessly, tools were the thin boundary between life and death. Without them, meat was an unmanageable mass, hides were useless shells, and predators held the upper hand. With tools, Neanderthals could stand alongside the largest hunters, preserve food, withstand the cold, and extend their reach beyond the pure strength of the body. Each blade, each spear was more than a physical object. It was crystallized intelligence, experience sharpened into an edge, a fragment of collective knowledge retained in stone, wood, and bone. Through these implements, Neanderthals transformed nature into tools, replacing claws with intellect, and carved survival from the frozen landscape. In a frigid world where large beasts dominated the icy plains, food did not come solely from hunting. Neanderthals also turned to plants, roots, tubers, and seeds, silent yet resilient contributions from nature. From barren hillsides to the banks of melting ice streams, each season revealed a different storehouse, available to those who could recognize and exploit it. During the brief warmth, meadows and sparse forests yielded wild grasses and berries. In the summer sun, wild strawberry bushes bore clusters of red-purple fruit. Blueberries and raspberries appeared, and small chestnuts provided concentrated energy. Neanderthals gathered berries, eaten immediately or stored in cool rock crevices for preservation. Hard seeds were cracked with stones to access the nutritious cores, sometimes mixed with animal fat to create high-energy mixtures. Severe winter demanded digging deeper into the earth. Roots, wild bulbs, and underground stems of many plants became hidden sources of nourishment. With stone tools in hand, frozen soil was broken apart to extract starchy tubers. Though sometimes bitter or tough, roasting over fire transformed these into palatable, energy-rich food. Bark and young leaves of some plants were also used. Willow bark, for example, could be chewed to reduce pain or lower fever, containing salicin, a natural precursor of aspirin. Tender leaves and spring shoots, though low in calories, supplied fiber and essential minerals within the otherwise sparse winter diet. Along streams where melting ice created damp zones. Neanderthals found wild water chestnuts, horsetail, and even freshwater algae. These supplemented nutrition when game was scarce. Every plant, every seed was remembered across generations. Which berries were edible, which leaves were toxic, which roots could be roasted, which plants had medicinal value. All knowledge transmitted silently, etched into habit, memory, and gestures within the cave's shadowed interior. In the harsh environment, plants never provided the abundance of tropical regions, but they compensated for gaps in nutrition, supplying fiber, vitamins, and auxiliary energy. Thus, Neanderthals survived not only on animal blood and meat, but also on the sparse vegetation emerging from frozen ground, hidden beneath ice or tucked within roots. When harvesting plants, consumption in fresh form risked rapid spoilage in damp conditions or brief warm spells. To preserve food for blizzards or when animals moved away, Neanderthals devised simple but effective storage methods, ensuring that each resource contributed to sustaining life through the long winter months. In the cold darkness of the cave, the deep rock hollows became natural storage spaces. Berries, if not eaten immediately, could be placed in the cold crevices where the north wind helped keep them fresh longer. Some slightly acidic berries had mild antibacterial properties, and when stored within layers of dry leaves, their shelf life extended further. Roots, bulbs, and wild onions were dug up and piled near the cave entrance, covered with animal hides or leaves to keep them dry and prevent freezing. When needed, the covering was removed and the tubers placed over glowing embers. The heat of the fire broke down cellulose fibers, releasing sweetness and transforming the hard, dry tubers into a readily digestible source of energy. Hard seeds such as chestnuts or wild hazelnuts, difficult to chew raw, were cracked with flat stones. Some were roasted directly over embers, splitting the shell while preserving the crisp, fat-rich kernel. Small seeds could be ground with stones and mixed with animal fat to create a dense, portable mixture suitable for long journeys. Even leaves and bark, which carried little caloric value, were prepared before consumption. Young leaves could be crushed and soaked in warm water from melted snow, reducing bitterness. Willow bark, unpleasant to chew raw, was often shredded and roasted briefly over the fire, making it easier to use as a primitive medicine. During prolonged cold, snow outside was both an adversary and an ally. Berries and tubers could be buried directly into thick snow, turning the cold into a natural storage chamber. As long as the snow melted slowly, these foods remained intact when dug up later. These simple preservation and preparation methods reflected keen observation and adaptive skill. Without clay pots or salt, Neanderthals relied on fire, stone, and the surrounding environment to retain the energy stored in plants, sustenance to endure failed hunts or periods when game moved beyond reach. In the frozen world, no individual could survive long alone. Hunting massive animals or confronting predators required collective strength, and to do so, both body and skill had to be continuously honed from early childhood. Steps became accustomed to deep snow. Traveling long distances across frozen plains, carrying heavy loads of firewood or meat, became silent, persistent training. Climbing rocky slopes, crossing dense forests, or fording icy streams strengthened muscles and lungs, adapting them to harsh climates. Broad chests and thick shoulders resulted not only from heredity but also from repeated labor and movement. Personal strength was vital, but bringing down a ton-weighted animal demanded coordination. In the dark cave, fire flickering, movements of throwing spears, lifting logs, and handling tools were repeated, and the rhythmic strike of stone on stone, accompanied by short calls, became a form of group training. On the plains, before real hunts, small groups could practice by driving herds of smaller animals like deer or short-necked antelopes, or by throwing spears at tree trunks or logs to test accuracy. Walking in formation along slopes, each individual learned to observe the movements of the one ahead, keeping proper spacing to avoid losing position. Hunting tactics were not instinctive but forged over multiple seasons. Groups divided roles: who blocked the front, who drove from behind, who concealed in bushes. Each position demanded different physical abilities, and rotating roles over successive hunts ensured evenly trained bodies. These skills etched into collective memory, becoming traditions passed from generation to generation. There were no drums or long commands, only simple signals: a raised hand, a short call, or a fleeting glance. This silent coordination emerged from years of living closely together, sharing fire, food, and enduring harsh winters. Through this training and coordination, Neanderthals could approach a bison, encircle a herd of wild horses, or drive mammoths toward a marshy trap. Success was not guaranteed, but preparation and cohesion created opportunities to return with meat, hides, and fat essential sustenance in the Ice Age, within the caves, amid flickering firelight and the whistle of wind across the plains. Neanderthal children grew inseparable from labor and hunting. Their bodies were not yet strong enough to confront massive beasts, but training began quietly from a young age, integrated naturally into the life of the group. At first, children observed. As adults carefully shaped stones into spear points, small hands picked up fragments, testing grip and strike. When wooden spears were hardened over fire, young eyes followed each movement, absorbing techniques. Repetition etched these lessons into memory, forming a silent curriculum as they grew. Children took on small tasks, gathering dry branches for the fire, carrying light bones, guarding the cave entrance. On short excursions, they followed adults, learning to move silently while observing herds, to recognize tracks in the mud. Distinguishing deer from predator prints, play became practice. Small logs and pointed stones were used to train throwing skills. Targets could be a nearby tree or a pile of dry leaves mimicking prey. Each missed throw was retried until arm strength adjusted to weight, and distance estimation became instinctive when their bodies were stronger. Children joined real hunts, initially at the periphery. They observed the group encircling prey, coordinated spear throws, and how fire and calls disrupted movement. Sometimes their task was simply to run behind herds, guiding animals toward the main hunters, through successive winters and hunts, from play to skill, from observation to practice. A Neanderthal child became a hunter. There was no formal ceremony, but the milestone was clear. The first time their spear pierced the hide, and the group recognized them as a true hunter. Generations like these succeeded one another, preserving collective memory without interruption. In the harsh climate, each child grew not merely to survive, but to become a vital link in the chain of coordination. Another body in the encirclement of the massive creatures that roamed the frozen plains, on the icy grasslands, where the north wind swept across barren soil and dew froze on each blade of grass. The enormous footprints of mammoths sank deep into the damp earth. Each imprint formed a small crater, revealing the immense weight of the towering bodies. These creatures represented the greatest prize, a reservoir of meat, fat, and bone capable of sustaining the group for weeks. No single spear could pierce their thick hides instantly. Such beasts could not be felled in open terrain. Therefore, the hunt depended on terrain. Neanderthals chose narrow mountain gorges, cliffs standing like colossal gates. From behind, fires were set, smoke twisting in the wind, stones rolled clattering across the ground. Noise, heat, and invisible pressure drove the mammoth along a predetermined path. When the gorge narrowed, leaving no room to turn, size became a liability. Long spears struck at the softer underbelly, under the neck and armpits, where the hide was thinner. The mammoth's trumpeting echoed like thunder, reverberating through the ravine. It thrashed, but each step only intensified the bleeding. Eventually, the immense weight could no longer resist exhaustion. The colossal body collapsed onto the cold earth. Meat, fat, bone, and ivory became sustenance, tools and materials feeding the group through the long winter. In the lowlands, near forest edges, another hunt unfolded. The target was the aurochs, massive wild cattle with crescent-shaped horns as sharp as stone knives. The herd moved tightly, heads low, bodies brimming with strength. To take one, Neanderthals could not charge directly into the dense formation. Instead, they split into two groups, one concealed in the brush, the other creating noise to drive the herd toward a chosen path. When the animals entered a narrow space between the forest edge and a stream, cohesion broke. A few were pushed to the margins, colliding chaotically, and in that fleeting moment, heavy spears were hurled, piercing shoulders and flanks. The wounded animals bucked wildly, horns whistling in the wind. Spears struck repeatedly from multiple angles, gradually paralyzing the muscles. Finally, bleeding bodies collapsed, and the ferocity was replaced by silence. Danger lurked in every hunt. A single strike could end a hunter's life, yet coordination and strategy turned massive power into sustenance. As winter approached, the sky grew leaden, the chill thickened, and herds of reindeer began their southern migration. This was the anticipated moment. Along familiar animal paths, Neanderthals dug pit traps, covering them with dry leaves and a thin layer of snow. As the herd moved, hundreds of hooves struck the ground in unison, sounding like distant drums. A single individual stumbled into a pit, sending ripples through the herd. Others trampled chaotically, some straying to the edges, some sinking into soft marshlands. Swift spears struck, piercing thick fur, drawing blood, and felling the animal. From reindeer, meat became the main food source, hides stretched into clothing and blankets, sinews twisted into binding ropes. Every part of the body was utilized, sustaining life in the icy wilderness. Wild horses, swift and wary, required a different approach, large and persistent, ready to flee at any moment. The herd was guided toward shallow river bends, where narrow banks formed natural funnels. Pressed into this confined space, water splashing, hooves pounding, the herd's movement became disordered. Spears from either side struck shoulders, flanks, and chests. Panic, rather than protection, left the weaker animals behind. The strong muscles, thick hides, and long bones of wild horses became both nourishment and raw material for tools. In the low grasslands bordering forests, smaller traps targeted hares and other small creatures. Shallow pits, wooden barricades, or cleverly positioned stones collapsed when animals entered. The small bodies were quickly gathered. Hare meat, low in fat, when cooked with mammoth or aurochs fat, became energy-rich food. Thin hides were skinned and dried, used to line bedding, retaining warmth through long, freezing nights. Sometimes, confrontation arose not from prey, but from competitors. Cave bears slunk from shadows, giant hyenas prowled near carcasses, cave lions moved slowly across the plains. In these moments, Neanderthals did not attack first, but when threatened, the group assembled instantly. Fire was held firmly, heavy stones readied, spears aimed at chest or throat. These encounters were not hunts for food, but battles to protect resources and life. In every hunt, all elements, terrain, climate, herd behavior, were carefully observed. No action was random. Each movement was the product of memory passed down from generation to generation, forged through failures and lessons. In a world of beasts, stronger and more relentless than humans, victory came not from muscle alone, but from coordination, patience, and intelligence. It was this skill that allowed Neanderthals to endure for hundreds of thousands of years, among creatures larger and fiercer than themselves. In the Ice Age, Predators constantly shadowed Neanderthal habitats. Cave lions, European leopards, cave bears, and giant hyenas competed for the same food and territory. Survival required more than strength. It demanded intellect, skillful use of terrain, and tools to evade or confront danger. When moving across the frozen plains, Neanderthal groups often chose rocky paths or low shrub clusters. Rugged terrain allowed distant observation and provided cover in case of sudden threats. If reflective eyes of predators appeared at dusk, the group closed ranks, placing children in the center while adults wielded spears on the outer perimeter, ready to drive the threat away. Often, a single shout accompanied by firelight was enough to send predators fleeing, as fire represented a power they could not endure. Within the shelter of caves, defensive preparations were meticulous. Large stones were rolled to block the entrance, leaving only a narrow passage. Fires were maintained through the night. Smoke and light provided warmth while deterring intruders. On the darkest winter nights, with winds howling through the cave mouth, predator tracks lingered at the edge of the firelight, but could not breach the circle of safety. Sometimes, confrontation was unavoidable. A large cave bear approached a cache of food stored in rock crevices. In that instant, the Neanderthals did not flee. They lined up, spears pointed forward. Firebrands were thrown, smoke and flames flaring before the bear's eyes. The encounter lasted only a few heartbeats, but it was enough to force the giant animal back into darkness. In a world where predators and humans coexisted, every step across the snow was a survival calculation. Neanderthals understood that strength did not reside in a single individual, but in the coordinated effort of the group, in the ability to read terrain, and in the foresight to create fire and tools. It was this combination that allowed ancient humans to maintain their place in the chain of survival. Fragile yet enduring, even in the face of razor-sharp claws and overwhelming force. In life among the frozen expanse, injuries and illness were inevitable. Scratches from predators, cuts from shaping tools, or prolonged fevers during the long winters all threatened the survival of the group. To counter these dangers, Neanderthals relied not only on physical strength, but also on a deep understanding of the plant world, transforming the forest into a source of medicine. Observation of the animals revealed patterns. Many wounded creatures sought certain plants, rubbing against bark, chewing leaves, or resting on thick moss. From these behaviors, ancient humans experimented. Bitter leaves were crushed and applied to open wounds to staunch bleeding and reduce swelling. Sticky roots were mashed, mixed with cold water, and spread over burns to ease pain. Bark containing tannins was soaked and then used to cleanse wounds, preventing infection. Some fungi were also used. Dried mushrooms, when burned, produced pungent smoke, sometimes smoked within caves to repel insects and purify stagnant air. Certain mosses, absorbing water rapidly, were pressed into rudimentary bandages to staunch bleeding. Sweet-tasting roots, simmered in stone pots over fire, yielded nourishing drinks that cooled fevered bodies while providing energy. These understandings did not arise in a single lifetime, but were preserved as collective memory passed down through generations. When an individual fell ill, the group turned to familiar sources: a cluster of herbs near a rock face, a dark tree trunk in the valley where leaves and bark had saved lives before. Each successful application reinforced knowledge, embedding it into the habits of the group, forming an invisible repository of survival wisdom. By flickering firelight and amid pungent smoke, Neanderthals wielded more than just spears and stone knives. They possessed another weapon, the knowledge of plants. It was a fragile yet invaluable protection, enabling bodies to recover from wounds, fevers, and continue moving across the harsh snow and ice of the Ice Age. In the bitter darkness of the Ice Age, food preparation was not merely a technical task, but a pillar of survival. In the frozen environment, where food was scarce and the human body constantly threatened by hunger, each step in handling provisions became a refined craft, honed through hundreds of thousands of years of accumulated experience. Meat, fat, bones, and plants were never wasted. Every part of prey, every root, every hard seed was utilized to maximize energy and prolong survival. When a large animal was felled, processing began immediately at the kill site. Stone blades, meticulously sharpened, sliced through thick hide and dense layers of fat. Dark red chunks of meat were separated and set aside, while the hide was removed intact for later use as clothing or shelter. On site, tender meat and soft fat were roasted directly on wooden spits or flat stones set near the fire. Heat caused muscle fibers to contract. Fat melted and dripped onto embers, releasing the characteristic aroma of smoke. Melted fat was collected in hollow stones or bones, then used as additional fuel to illuminate the cave, or incorporated into dried meat to increase caloric content. Large sections of meat that could not be consumed immediately were processed, without delay to prevent spoilage. They were cut into long strips and hung high on wooden frames within the cave, where smoke from the hearth gradually dried the surface, creating a protective layer against bacteria while infusing the meat with a pungent scent that deterred scavengers. In winter, the cold became an invisible ally. Meat could be buried under thick snow or stored in cold earth crevices for weeks, even months. Large leg bones were split with stone hammers, their marrow extracted directly or simmered near the fire to produce a thick, energy-rich broth that was both warming and easily digested. Plants, though modest in energy content, were treated with equal care. Hard, dry roots were initially difficult to chew, but after roasting over embers or cooking, they became soft and digestible. Some roots released a faint sweetness when heated. Hard seeds were crushed between stones into coarse flour, then mixed with water or animal fat to form a thick paste, resembling a primitive porridge or flat cake. Leaves could be used to wrap meat over a fire, ensuring even cooking without burning. Soft berries were eaten immediately, but some were dried on flat stones near the fire, forming reserves for leaner seasons. Even internal organs held vital value. Liver, heart, and kidneys, rich in iron and vitamins, were quickly roasted over embers and consumed immediately to restore strength after a hunt. The stomach of a large animal, cleaned, could serve as a container for water, fat, or even dried meat. Intestines, cleaned and dried, became cordage, or sometimes food when cooked with fat. Every part held purpose. Nothing was wasted within the cave. Spaces for processing and storage became essential. Crossbeams were erected along walls, laden with dried meat and hides. On the earthen floor near the fire, large bones, hollow skulls, and flat stones held fat or broth. The scent of hanging meat, blackened smoke clinging to the stone ceiling, and fat melting over embers mingled into a dense atmosphere, a space where the life of the group was sustained. Every meal amid smoke and fire was not merely nourishment, but a communal ritual. Members gathered, sharing freshly roasted meat, sipping hot marrow broth, chewing softened roots. In the flickering light, hunger receded, and a temporary sense of safety settled. For Neanderthals, food preparation was not just a skill, but a ritual reaffirming the existence of the community in a harsh world, where life was always precarious. In the frozen expanses of the Ice Age, clothing and shelter were far more than mere convenience. They were the boundary between life and death. Neanderthals, guided by a keen observation of nature, learned to transform animal hides, thick fur, and even tree bark into protective layers for the body and safe spaces for the group. Survival demanded ingenuity, and every artifact of clothing or shelter was a testament to both intelligence and endurance. When a large animal fell, the work of skinning began immediately after the meat was sectioned. Sharp-edged stone blades sliced along the belly and limbs, and thick patches of hide were carefully removed, scraped clean of excess fat and flesh with scraping tools. The hides were then stretched across wooden frames or laid on flat stones to dry under sun and wind, or hung above smoke. The smoke not only ensured even drying, but also repelled insects and harmful bacteria, while softening fibers to prevent cracking. Larger hides, from mammoths or ox, or woolly rhinos, became robust coverings for shelters, while smaller hides from hares, foxes, or snow wolves were fashioned into insulating layers. To enhance durability, Neanderthals used the very sinews of the animal, stripped and twisted into tough cords to tie or stitch hides together. Sharp bone tools, called awls, were employed to punch holes, threading sinew through as rudimentary stitches. From these efforts emerged basic garments, outer cloaks, loincloths, and foot coverings. Thick fur faced outward, shielding against icy winds, while smooth hide lay close to the body, retaining precious warmth. Children were often swaddled in multiple layers of soft hides, sheltered against the long, bitter nights. Alongside animal hides, tree bark became another essential resource. From birch trees, thin yet resilient bark was stripped, dried, and pieced together to form roofing for tents, or layered as moisture barriers between the ground and sleeping areas. Fibers from bark or soft wood were braided into cords to stabilize frames or to sew hides into more durable coverings. Tents were typically pitched near cave mouths or on elevated ground to escape prevailing winds. Frameworks made of mammoth long bones or sturdy branches were arched, then draped with hides or bark. When the wind roared across the plain, the structure flexed but did not collapse, forming a protective shield against the harsh climate. Inside, the floor was lined with soft hides and dry grass, insulating against cold seeping from stone and earth in this icy world. Every layer of hide, every sheet of bark, represented an adaptation. Clothing preserved body heat, while hide shelters shielded the group from wind and predatory threats. Together, they reflected not only craftsmanship, but the intelligence to combine natural materials into a sustainable survival system, sustaining Neanderthal existence for hundreds of thousands of years. Under the misted veil of the Ice Age, where frozen grasslands stretched endlessly and sparse forests stood silent beneath snow, survival relied on more than hunting or fire. An equally vital factor was the art of processing animal hides and natural materials, transforming them into clothing, shelters, and insulation against the cold. This was never the work of a solitary individual. It was a coordinated task, reflecting a social order honed over countless generations. When a large animal was felled, the thick hide was nearly as valuable as the meat itself. At the kill site, experienced and robust members began cutting along the spine, peeling hide away from muscle, while thin stone blades and polished bones removed clinging fat. The wet hide was rolled and transported back to the camp alongside meat and bones. Within the settlement, meticulous work commenced. Skilled hands, often adult women or elders less involved in hunting, cleaned the hides. They were stretched over wooden frames, scraped of fat and residual tissue with sharp stones or animal teeth. To soften, hides were rubbed with animal brains or fat, then hung near the fire so smoke could permeate, preventing decay. The mingling sense of smoke, fat, and remaining fur created a familiar aroma, the scent of life sustained within the cave. Once the hide was supple, others took over the crafting. Some cut hides into smaller pieces, stitched them with sinew, using bone awls as needles. Garments were simple cloaks, tied with leather thongs, but sufficient to preserve warmth. Larger sections of hide remained intact to form walls of tents. Strong individuals constructed frames from mammoth rib bones or wooden poles, then draped the hides, securing them with stones and earth. The division of labor extended further. Children, too small for hunting or advanced crafting, contributed in smaller ways, gathering twigs for drying hides, stacking stones to block wind, or assisting in cleaning sinews, intestines, and bones. Elders, besides passing on knowledge, guided delicate tasks, teaching how to thread sinew, select proper wood for frames, or treat bark to yield flexible, durable fibers. Stripped bark, soaked and softened, could be braided into mats or cordage, essential for fastening structures or insulating floors. In this environment, a vivid tableau of communal activity unfolded, hands stretching sinew into hides by firelight, the rhythmic sound of stones striking bones as tent frames rose, children scuttling with dry branches, smoke embedding into every surface. Each member, regardless of age, contributed to the collective enterprise. Clothing and shelters were not only protective layers, but tangible manifestations of collective knowledge, transmitted not through written words, but through hands passing skills from one generation to the next. Winter after winter, in the unforgiving cold of the Ice Age, true strength lay not in a single individual, but in the ability of the group to transform animal carcasses, bark, and bones into a livable world sustained within the long darkness of snow and ice, within the hide tents pitched against icy winds. Neanderthal life converged around a single center, the fire. Tents, supported by mammoth bones and draped in multiple layers of thick hide, retained heat even when the wind howled outside. The reddish flames flickered across the surfaces of the hides, casting shifting patches of light and shadow, like the steady breath of a colossal being. Inside this enclosed space, the fire was more than warmth. It was the pulse of the community. Meat skewered on sticks roasted over embers, fat dripping in steady drops, sometimes collected in hollow stones or intestines repurposed as containers. Smoke threaded through seams of hide, lingering on garments and hair, creating a distinctive scent inseparable from life itself. Dried meat strips hanging near the roof absorbed the smoke, ready to sustain the group through unsuccessful hunts. Around the fire, the structure of the group revealed itself clearly. Adult individuals, those who had brought back meat and hides, usually sat closest to the flames, facilitating the division of food. Children occupied the inner circle, near the elders, simultaneously sheltered and guided in the ways of handling bones, scraping residual meat, or holding tools. Elders, whose strength was no longer suited to expeditions across frozen plains, acted as living repositories of collective memory. They instructed how to hang meat to dry, stitch hides to retain warmth, or wrap newborns in the softest layers of fur. Clothing, like food, was not merely functional, it was shared. When a new hide cloak was completed, it might be tried on immediately inside the tent under the firelight, so the entire group could observe and adjust it. The most skillful individuals took responsibility for tying cords, stitching seams, or adding small bone markers, not for decoration, but to indicate utility or the position of a patch. In this setting, a newly finished garment symbolized collective labor, a proof that the group retained the strength to endure the approaching winter. On certain nights, the wind was blocked outside the tent, leaving only the crackle of burning wood and the thick aroma of roasting meat. Stories without words were told, instead through gestures, eye contact, and the rhythmic tapping of stone against bone to illustrate hunting techniques or hide processing. Shadows cast by the fire flickered across hides, forming moving shapes, part performance, part living memory, transmitting knowledge to the next generation. In this light, the boundaries between eating, dressing, sheltering, and passing on expertise dissolved, creating a ritual of deep communal cohesion. Every gathering around the fire within the hide tent affirmed the persistence of life, despite the darkness and ice outside. Fire, food, and clothing were not only survival tools, but also the thread binding the group together, small community resisting the vast, frigid expanse of the Ice Age. As the seasons changed, Neanderthal rituals of gathering shifted with the rhythm of the earth. Each season brought its own cadence of life, requiring adaptation, carrying fire, food, and shelter like portable pulses through a harsh world. In summer, when grasslands were green and large herds roamed in endless streams, hide tents were erected in open spaces. Frameworks were anchored firmly in hard ground. Hides stretched lightly to catch breezes. Fires burned smaller, sufficient only to provide light and repel insects, no longer combating the cold. Around the fire, the group ate simple roasted meat, often cooked directly over embers, while the remainder was dried and preserved for winter. In the long daylight, hunting stories unfolded outdoors, beneath trees or on rocky outcrops, where everyone could observe herds moving across the distant plain. Autumn brought greater density, multiple layers of hides piled upon tents, doors drawn tightly, fires burning thicker. Preparations accelerated, meat hung on high racks, roasted roots stored in rock crevices, and hides processed into garments and coverings. Fire gatherings took on a solemn tone, with tasks carefully distributed: who would tend the fire overnight, who checked traps, who led children in tracking signs across the ground. Winter drew all activity inward, into deep cave spaces. Hide tents became insulating layers against wind. The fire, now the absolute center, the sole source of light, warmth, and sensory presence. In long moonless nights, the group huddled close, sharing dried meat and fat stored in prepared stomach pouches. Winter rituals fostered the deepest bonds. Children listened as elders recounted hunted species. Adults sharpened stone blades beside the flames, and women and adolescents repaired garments. Every sound, the strike of stone on bone, the pop of burning wood, formed a shared rhythm, dispelling the deadly silence of the frozen landscape outside. Spring thaw brought outdoor gatherings once again. Bubbling streams became part of daily activity. Meat could be soaked, hides washed and dried on fresh grass. The group pitched tents near hunting grounds, where green grass drew returning herds. Meals around the fire took on brighter hues, tender young meat, fresh roots, and early berries. Storytelling merged with instruction, passing hunting knowledge to youth, a cycle of intergenerational learning. Through each season, tent structures, food sharing, and fire rituals shifted. Yet the core remained constant: fire as center, food as bond, and community as the greatest shield against a hostile climate. In the rhythm of the seasons, these rituals inscribed Neanderthal presence into the Ice Age itself. The closeness around the fire, the hide tents, and the communal meals were inseparable from the Neanderthals' own bodies. Biologically, they bore clear adaptations to Ice Age conditions: robust bodies, dense bones, shorter limbs to minimize heat loss, wide chests to support strong respiration in frigid air, and large nasal cavities to warm inhaled air before it reached the lungs. Yet these biological advantages alone were insufficient to withstand prolonged cold. It was the ritualized lifestyle that formed a second layer of protection. When bodies demanded high energy to maintain warmth, group meals centered on animal fat and dried meat, providing concentrated calories. During the brief light of winter, gathering around fire preserved heat while creating a shared environment, reducing individual energy expenditure as the community sheltered one another. Strong physiques enabled demanding hunts, but it was collective coordination, shared hunting rituals, erecting tents, managing fire, and distributing food that compensated for biological limitations, such as slower mobility compared to modern humans or reduced capacity to cope with sudden environmental changes. In other words, Neanderthal survival arose not only from bones, muscle, and genetic inheritance, but also from customs. Biology gave the strength to endure the cold. Community rituals provided the resilience to survive each season. Within this intertwining, Neanderthals had created a second skin, not of flesh and blood, but of survival culture. In the world of the Neanderthals, where ice and snow blanketed the land and every effort at survival was inseparable from food, fire, and shelter, another layer of daily life existed, more refined, transcending mere material needs: the crafting of ornaments from the spoils of the hunt. Teeth, claws, and fragments of bone materials that might otherwise be discarded were transformed into symbolic marks, connecting the individual to the group and recording the memory of their experiences. When a large animal fell to the hunters, beyond meat and hide, canines, sharp claws, or long bone fragments were carefully separated, washed in cold water, and dried near the fire. Neanderthals used sharp stone tools to bore tiny holes into these hard surfaces, a task demanding both patience and strength, as bone and tooth were unyielding. Sometimes, the stone drill would be rotated for hours until the perforation was complete. Dried sinew or plant fiber was threaded through the holes, converting raw material into necklaces, wristbands, or decorations hung upon hide tents. Small bone fragments were shaped and ground flat, occasionally engraved with simple parallel lines to form patterns. Bear canines, hyena claws, or predator bones were not merely trophies of conquests. They became emblems of strength, worn by adult members of the group. Some ornaments were passed through generations, forming collective memory, much like petroglyphs etched into stone, preserving the trace of time by the flickering firelight. Ornaments of bone and tooth reflected dim glimmers, entwined with the body, storytelling, and communal rituals. though they served no direct survival purpose like spear or knife. These objects fulfilled another function. They created identity, reinforced social bonds, and carried symbolic meaning beyond mere sustenance and clothing. They were an early manifestation of symbolic consciousness, a deep-seated aspect of Neanderthal cultural development. On winter nights, when blizzards howled outside the cave or wolves cried across the frozen plains, the group gathered around the fire. In these moments, ornaments of bone, tooth, and claw were central to a ritual of cohesion. The leader or the most experienced member held chains of canines and engraved bones marks of memory and authority. When a young individual succeeded in their first large hunt, a tooth or small bone from the fallen prey would be given, tied around the neck with sinew. This was not only a reward but a recognition, a rite of passage marking growth into the group. During the ritual, the firelight cast shadows over seated bodies. The tapping of stone and clinking of bones created a deep rhythm, while roasting meat emitted a rich, smoky scent. Older individuals, adorned with multiple strings of teeth and bone, bore witness to a lifetime of hunting and survival, serving as living memory of the group. Ornaments were not worn casually. Certain pieces were reserved for those who had hunted dangerous game. Others passed down at death, creating tangible links between generations. In the muted glow, bones, claws, and teeth shimmered as a silent language, reminding the group of collective strength and the memory of each hunting season. This simple ritual established a cultural dimension beyond mere nourishment and shelter, a domain where symbols, memory, and group cohesion were etched into small objects taken from nature. From an evolutionary perspective, Neanderthal ornamentation marked more than decoration or proof of hunting success. It demonstrated a cognitive step forward, the capacity to assign symbolic meaning to objects. A canine worn around the neck ceased to be merely part of a prey animal. It became an emblem of strength, memory, and role within the group. In cognitive evolution, this represented a shift from purely functional tools to symbolic tools, objects that carried meaning beyond immediate utility. The existence of ornaments shows that Neanderthals could abstract experiences of hunting, survival, and loss into tangible forms. They maintained collective memory, allowing young individuals to recognize that before them, generations had hunted, fought, and survived. In becoming a silent language, ornaments provided a framework for social complexity. Symbols reinforced social order, strengthened bonds, and shaped shared identity. In essence, wearing teeth, bone, and claws as cultural markers laid the foundation for symbolic forms in later Homo sapiens. Ritual and social emblems. Neanderthals did not merely live within nature. They began to construct a world of meaning within themselves. Within the unending ice of the Pleistocene, storing and preserving food was among the most critical survival strategies. Whenever the group killed a large animal or gathered abundant plants, they faced a pressing question: how to maintain this vital resource across days, weeks, or even months until the lean season arrived. Deep, cold, dimly lit caves often became natural storage sites. Meat was cut into slabs, hung on high rock ledges, or tucked into unreachable crevices, away from predators and rodents. Smoke from a smoldering fire wafted over the slabs, penetrating their surface to prevent spoilage, while imparting a distinct flavor. In the tight grip of winter, blocks of meat were even buried beneath ice, turning the ground itself into a vast natural cold storage chamber that preserved food for weeks. Animal fat, a precious source of energy, was often melted and poured into cleaned hollow hides or stomachs, then tightly sealed to exclude air. These pouches became portable reserves, ready to be reheated when needed. Marrow remained in long bones, protected by their hard casing, acting as sealed energy stores for lean periods. Plants, though less abundant, were preserved with equal care. Roots were sun-dried on flat stones and stored in woven grass or hide containers. Hard seeds, once crushed, were pressed into coarse cakes and dried near the fire. Berries were sun-dried or placed in leather pouches, hung high and dry. Storage was not simply about avoiding hunger. It demonstrated skill and observation. Neanderthals knew how to select naturally cold sites, use fire and smoke as allies, and employ every part of an animal to extend survival. In the shadowed depths of caves, strips of dried meat, pouches of fat, and hidden marrow bones were more than provisions, they were assurances of safety. A belief that the group would endure the long winter to see another hunting season in the cold. Shadowed depths of the cave, where slabs of meat hung from high rock ledges and fat was sealed in hollowed hides. The survival of the group depended not solely on hunting, but also on the careful protection and management of these stores. Any lapser, prowling hyena, a lone wolf on the hunt, or even the slow decay of meat in damp conditions could imperil the entire group. Neanderthals had developed a precise system of responsibility. Young, agile individuals, inexperienced in hunting, were often assigned to guard the stores. They sat close to the caches, tending small fires or torches so that smoke and light would deter predators. Adults, after returning from hunts, inspected the dried meat, determining which portions were for immediate consumption and which could be preserved longer. Bones containing marrow and pouches of fat were placed deep within hidden niches, entrusted to respected, experienced members to ensure they were not used recklessly. The elders, with knowledge accumulated over many hunting seasons, served as living repositories of food, wisdom. They knew which roots kept longest, which meats spoiled fastest, and where in the cave was driest, least humid. These lessons were passed orally during the distribution of food, forming unwritten rules that the entire group followed. Even daily rationing was orderly. Fresh meat from the hunt was prioritized for children and the sick, easier to digest and energetically vital. Dried meat and stored fat were removed only when necessary, and all members understood that overuse could endanger the group during the harsh winter months. Guarding food also meant guarding the fire. The flame not only cooked and preserved meat, but also provided warmth and kept predators at bay. Those watching the caches often rotated shifts to maintain the fire, knowing that any lapse, extinguishing the flame, letting smoke dwindle, or allowing wildlife to detect the scent could threaten everyone in this world of constant danger. The food stores became a center of discipline and cohesion. Every member, from the youngest to the oldest, played a part in its protection. In the endless Pleistocene winter, the preserved food was the silent heartbeat of life itself. On the cold rock walls, in the flickering firelight, streaks of red clay, lines of charcoal, and carvings from sharp stone appeared as signs transcending time. For Neanderthals, these were not merely traces of hands, but a means to record the relationship between the group and their surroundings. Some depictions illustrated animals they had hunted: the massive body of a bison, the chasing silhouette of a wild horse, the curved antlers of a giant deer. These images were not mere representations of reality. They were a means of preserving collective memory, marking the importance of species for survival or commemorating successful hunts. Others were more abstract spirals, dots, parallel lines, and diffused red patches. Modern archaeologists interpret these as early symbols, possibly linked to ritual, marking safe shelters, noting hunting seasons, or indicating an individual's role in the group. Perhaps these markings were among the first steps toward symbolic thought in the cave's dim light. As the group gathered by the walls, the flickering flames made the images appear animated. Scenes were used in rituals. Elders transmitted hunting knowledge, children observed, and hunters demonstrated strategy visually. The walls became a fusion of memory and knowledge, where the community reaffirmed its bond with the environment. The significance of the paintings extends beyond immediate survival. They represent a crucial cognitive evolution, from practical action to abstract thought, from hunting in the present to recreating it in imagery. The walls became mirrors of the mind, where life was not only maintained but imagined and recorded. The cave art can be considered the silent language of Neanderthals, a mode of expression surpassing cries, gestures, or fleeting signs. If spoken language arranged sound to convey ideas, then the images arranged visual symbols to encode memory and concepts. Both reflected symbolic capability, enabling information to be preserved and shared beyond the immediate moment. During a hunt, vocal calls might coordinate instant action, but the painting of a prey animal endured, allowing the group to remember strategies, teach the next generation, and even instill a sense of collective strength. In cognitive evolution, paintings and language functioned as parallel channels, one transient but flexible, the other durable but abstract. Together, they enhanced social cohesion and knowledge transfer, laying the foundation for humanity's future progress. Primitive music beats on hollow logs, stones striking one another, sounds from blown hollow bones, carried yet another symbolic value, intimate and primal. If cave art preserved imagery for the eye, and spoken language arranged sound for the mind, early music affected the body directly. It synchronized hearts and movements, aligning the group's breathing and physical rhythm, an invisible practice in collective coordination. In evolutionary terms, early music bridged enduring imagery and transient speech. Paintings preserved memory, language expanded ideas, and music connected communal feeling. Combined, these layers formed the foundation of social complexity, imagery linking through symbolism, language through ideas, and music through biological rhythm. Together, they allowed Neanderthals to transcend pure instinct, entering a world where knowledge, memory, and belief were shared through intertwined forms. Finally, as seasons passed, the group's survival was a delicate balance of biology, labor, and culture. Food stores, fire, shelter, cave paintings, ornaments, and music intertwined into a living system, a network of interdependence that sustained life against the relentless Pleistocene cold. In these frozen chambers, Neanderthals demonstrated more than survival skills. They revealed the emergence of culture itself, the first outlines of symbolic thought, and the earliest expression of collective memory. Through the darkness, the flickering light, and the steady rhythm of shared effort, a glimpse of humanity's enduring spirit was born, etched into stone, shaped in bone, and carried in the pulse of the group. In the end, the Neanderthal story in the cave is not merely one of survival, it is a testament to adaptation, cognition, and social cohesion. Within the icebound silence, they built a world of meaning, ensuring that life persisted not only in body but in mind, leaving traces that would echo far beyond the Pleistocene.